In this speech, I'm going to be discussing discrimination against those who are deaf. This is one of the lesser talked about or heard of discriminations, and in my study I explored 3 different articles, and I'm going to be discussing some of the key points of each of the articles. The first article is called Reconsidering Sound in the City, Assessing the Right to the Deaf-Friendly City by Gil Harold, written in 2010. In this article, Harold explores some of the limitations of people who are deaf. One of the main things in this article is about phonocentrism. Phonocentrism is a big word, but it's defined as rendering a deaf person as less than fully human on the basis of their ability to engage with sound as hearing people do. In this article, it states that the view supported by phonocentrism is that language is human, speech is language, therefore deaf people are inhuman, and deafness is a problem. That is a very discriminatory statement, because deafness is not a choice of an individual. An individual is either born deaf and they can't hear, or they become hard of hearing during their life due to many different issues, or maybe just because they worked at a place where there was a lot of sound and their eardrums were damaged. Think about everyday activities that you and I take for granted. These are activities such as waking up with your alarm on your phone. If you were deaf, you would either have to have some kind of vibration or a roommate wake you up, or some kind of lights, flashing lights that would wake you up. Just hearing people talk, you wouldn't be able to communicate. Either you'd have to communicate through sign language or through written communication. You wouldn't be able to listen to your favorite music. In traffic, you wouldn't have the advantage if something was dangerous and somebody needed to honk their horn. You wouldn't be able to hear it. He gives, in this article, Harold gives several examples. One of them is of a deaf person going into a fast food restaurant. They either have to point at the menu, which may annoy or frustrate the worker, or if they have a problem with their credit card, they go into the bank, and the bank tells them to call the credit card company. They can't hear what the credit card company person is telling them, so that's not helpful at all. The next article that I looked at was by Gina Shaw, and it is called Fighting Workplace Discrimination Against the Hearing Impaired. In this article, Shaw talks about many examples of discrimination in the workplace, but I'm going to talk about 2 of the examples. One of them was about Rochelle Duran, and she was deaf, and she applied to work for Creative Network out of Phoenix, but they had denied her an interpreter for the orientation and training session, and so she wasn't able to get the job. This article didn't go on to talk about what happened after that, but it goes on to the next lawsuit, and in the next lawsuit, Laura Nidero, she worked for a manufacturing company for 13 years, and then they wanted her to use a new kind of computer software, and they didn't give her an interpreter to understand the training for the new computer software, and so she was fired. According to the lawsuit, the company had not followed Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and so she was able to sue them for $95,000, and they had to agree to train the supervisors and managers regarding employees' obligation and rights under the ADA, which stands for American with Disabilities Act. These are just 2 examples, and there are so many other examples that she talked about. And she also talked about a lady named Mary Clark. She's a professional hearing loss coach, and she states that there are so many examples of how people with hearing loss do not know what to ask for, and their bosses are unable to come up with solutions to help someone with hearing loss. This results, she says, sadly, in an individual hearing loss no longer including the off-the-cuff communication with other employees. A deaf person is then easily marginalized simply because he or she has not been participating in the group communication. There are some solutions to help with this issue. There's new technology coming out, and it's always increasing, many gadgets and devices that can either amplify speech for those who are hard of hearing or use visual text-based to assist the deaf. Ms. Clark also talks about practical ways that you could help somebody who is deaf by filling them in on information or making sure they know about a meeting or new rules that are coming up. She talks about a story when she had, in her office, the furniture was turned inward, and so when someone came in her office, she couldn't see them come in, and she wouldn't hear them talking to her. And so she went out and bought a rear view mirror, so when somebody walked in, she could look at it and see who was coming in and read their lips and understand and be able to communicate back with them. So even simple things like that can make a deaf person's job much easier. The last article talked about, it was called Estimates of Wage Discrimination Against Workers with Sensory Disabilities, with Controls for Job Demands by Marjorie Baldwin, written in November 2011. This article speaks extensively on discrimination of the wages of those people, and she talks about story after story, and she talks about how in America there's 5.5% people who cannot hear, and of that 5.5%, 3.4 of them have jobs. The other ones don't have jobs because it is very hard for someone who is deaf to get a job. In a job interview, one of the main things an employer is looking for in potential employees is that they can communicate well. And so if they're deaf, that really hinders them, even though deaf people can do so many jobs, whether it's working at an office or being in working in an office or driving a bus or helping mentor, teach other people who are deaf. There are many jobs, and they can use the TDD, which is like a device that helps you speak into that device, and then it writes out whatever that person said, and so the person who is deaf can be able to read what the person and understand what they are saying. There are those who with hearing disorders are 90% less chance to have a job, and people with sensory disabilities already have a hard life, and so it makes it harder when they can't get a job and they have to rely on the government, even if they want to be good working citizens. So deaf people have a hard job, and deaf people, their work is not any less valuable than somebody who can hear. And so we need to not discriminate by looking for ways to help those who are deaf. Thank you.